The colony of Argonaut Base was supposed to be humanity's crown jewel, a shining example of progress, resilience, and technological might. A sprawling outpost nestled on the edge of the Paliomar Expanse, a remote region of space where humanity had for decades carved out its first foothold among the stars. From the outside, it looked like any other thriving colony, metal spires reaching toward an artificial sun, shimmering biodomes that housed lush forests and sprawling fields, and walls made of alloys designed to withstand the harshest environments. It was a beacon to the universe, proof that humanity could adapt and conquer. Inside, though, it was different. Commander Elias Ward stood at the heart of the command center, his hands pressed against the console. His eyes stared at the swirling images on the holo-screen, unreadable alien symbols, vast data streams, and unsettling flickering red alerts. Something was wrong, but the intel didn't make sense. No one had expected the Drallik to arrive so soon. The Drallik are coming. The voice of his chief intelligence officer, Dr. Maya Rowe, echoed through his earpiece. It was calm, clinical, but beneath it Elias could hear the tension, a tightness that mirrored his own growing unease. We're too late. They've bypassed our outer defenses, and their fleet is already making its approach. Elias had known that something was off. For weeks, the strange disruptions in the comm systems, the sudden silence from nearby colonies, the sudden appearance of unidentified ships near the edge of the expanse. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Drallik weren't just another alien race. They were conquerors, known across the galaxy for their brutal efficiency, their hive-mind approach to war, and their technology far beyond humanity's own. Are we going to be able to stop them? Elias asked, his voice steady, but his hands betraying him as they clenched into fists. They weren't ready for this. How could they be? The Drallik's war machines were legendary. The sheer size and scale of their weapons were unimaginable to human eyes. Maya didn't answer right away. Instead, there was a brief pause, the sound of fingers tapping on a keyboard. She had always been a realist. If there was a way to fight back, she'd find it. I don't know, she said softly. They've crippled our external defenses already. Our automated weapons are offline, our fleets are scattered, and I'm not sure we can get reinforcements in time. The weight of those words hung in the air. Elias looked up at the distant stars visible through the viewport, each one a reminder of humanity's aspirations. But those stars didn't seem so inviting anymore. The black void between them, once a vast ocean to be navigated, now felt like a suffocating trap. He exhaled, the breath leaving him cold as he turned back toward his team. They'll underestimate us, Elias said, his voice low but full of determination. They always do. A sharp voice cut through the silence. Lieutenant Commander Kiara Thorne, his second in command, leaned over the console, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Kiara was pragmatic, driven, and relentless, but Elias had known her long enough to understand that her tough exterior hid something darker, a reminder of her past battles, losses that still haunted her. They may underestimate us, she said, her eyes hard with resolve. But that doesn't mean we'll win. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and our people are terrified. How do you fight an enemy that's not just a race but a collective mind? Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, his mind raced through the options, but each one felt futile. The Drallik weren't just invaders. They were hunters, searching for prey to consume, to annihilate. To them, humanity was an insignificant species, a nuisance. They never thought humans could fight back. That was their mistake. We don't need to win, Elias said, his voice quieter now, but carrying the weight of years spent strategizing, leading. We just need to make them pay for underestimating us. His words hung in the air as the rest of the command center fell into silence, the hum of the ship's machinery and the distant chatter of officers filling the void. There was no going back now. The Drallik were coming, and humanity's survival depended on every decision they made from this moment forward. In the back of the room, Dr. Maya Rowe adjusted her glasses, her fingers hovering over the console's keys. The data streams were coming in too fast, too chaotic to make sense of. They needed time. Time to figure out how the Drallik's collective intelligence worked, how their technology could be turned against them. "We can't rely on the old tactics," Maya muttered under her breath. "They've adapted too quickly. We need something different." Elias nodded. He had no idea what that different would be, but he knew one thing for sure. Humanity was resilient. They had fought for survival, in ways the Drallik couldn't comprehend. No matter how outmatched they were, humanity would find a way to adapt. It always had, but that didn't mean it would be easy. The team moved quickly, rallying around Elias's leadership, gathering what resources they had left. The mission now was simple: survive long enough to strike back. They would use every advantage, every shred of human ingenuity, to make the Drallik regret ever setting their sights on Earth's frontier. As Elias stood by the viewport, gazing out at the stars, once again he realized something. They might not be able to stop the Drallik, but they sure as hell could make sure the Drallik never forgot who they were dealing with, and the first step was surviving the next few hours. The Drallik warship appeared in the sky like a blot on the heavens. It wasn't a ship in the way humans understood it. It was an abomination of structure and intent, a gargantuan mass of metal and organic materials fused together, pulsating with a malevolent energy. The shape was more of a living organism than a vessel, with jagged protrusions, segmented plating, and an ever-shifting surface, as though it were breathing. The Paliomar Expanse had always been a place of mystery, the final frontier where the known universe met the unknown. And now, that expanse was about to be stained by the Drallik's arrival. Commander Elias Ward stood at the Tactical Command Center, his eyes fixed on the monitor as the Drallik ship loomed closer. Its massive silhouette blocked out the distant stars, casting a long shadow over Argonaut Base. It was only a matter of time before the rest of their fleet arrived. "Shields are at maximum, but they're still coming through," Maya reported, from her position, her voice unusually tight. The technician sitting beside her frantically typed commands, trying to reroute power to the colony's failing defenses. They had only minutes before the Drallik ship's weapons would tear through, their already crumbling outer shields. Elias felt the weight of it, the impending doom that seemed inescapable. His mind raced, but nothing prepared him for the moment when the Drallik finally made their presence known. A pulse of radiation lanced out from the warship, sizzling through space, and the defensive satellites surrounding the base began to flicker and die. One by one, they went dark. "They've disabled our satellites," Kiara said, her face hardening. "They've bypassed our outer defense grid. We're exposed." The sheer audacity of it was staggering. The Drallik hadn't even fired a shot, and already their dominance was established. It was clear that they considered the humans a mere inconvenience. "Activate the countermeasures," Elias ordered, his voice steady, but the tension in his chest was unmistakable. He could already hear the warning alarms blaring as the Drallik ship's approach continued undeterred. Kiara worked her station, her fingers dancing over the controls. But just as quickly as the orders were issued, they were rendered irrelevant. A deep low hum vibrated through the base, followed by a powerful shockwave that rattled the walls and sent debris crashing to the floor. "Shields down to 50%. "We can't sustain this for much longer," Maya called out. Elias gripped the edge of the console, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the pressure building, the realization that they were on the precipice of destruction. The Drallik weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here for peace. They were here to conquer. The first assault came suddenly, without warning. From the Drallik ship, an energy blast so immense and concentrated it seemed to tear the fabric of space itself, erupted toward the base. The impact was devastating. Argonaut Base's outer walls buckled under the pressure, large sections of it disintegrating into ash as the blast ripped through the defensive grid. "Evasive maneuvers," Elias shouted, his voice echoing through the command center. "Prepare to counterattack." But there was no time. The base was already on the verge of collapse. And then the ground shuddered, and the overhead lights flickered, plunging the command center into an eerie twilight. The base's backup generators hummed to life, but the damage was already done. The Drallik were inside. The Drallik warship's docking bays opened with terrifying efficiency, and alien soldiers, tall, spindly creatures with shifting, translucent skin and 4 black, unblinking eyes, began to pour out. They moved like a coordinated swarm, their minds operating as one, bound by the collective consciousness of the Drallik hive. The first humans to confront them were scattered, disoriented by the attack. Their weapons seemed insignificant against the sleek, darkened armor of the Drallik soldiers. The creatures moved with such precision that they almost seemed to glide over the ground, their bladed limbs flashing in the dim light as they cut through the human ranks. Screams filled the air, the staccato sounds of human weapons firing briefly before falling silent. "Get to the AR. Get to the armory," Elias yelled as he grabbed Kiara's arm, pulling her toward the back of the command center. There was no time to think, no time to consider how outmatched they were. All they could do now was survive. The Drallik's speed and precision were devastating. The humans tried to fight back, but every blow from the Drallik soldiers seemed calculated to disarm, not to kill, until they found a target worthy of their full wrath. The Drallik were methodical in their approach, as if this was nothing more than a routine mission, wiping out a pest species. The human resistance was chaotic, full of adrenaline and desperation. Soldiers fired in every direction, trying to hold back the flood of Drallik forces, but their weapons seemed to only inconvenience the invaders. The Drallik didn't need to take prisoners. They needed complete subjugation. Elias found himself in the heart of the chaos, rallying what remained of his team. Maya, Kiara, and a handful of others had made it to the Central Command Armory, where they armed themselves with whatever weaponry they could find. Nothing seemed like enough, but it was all they had. "Think, Elias," Kiara barked as she loaded a pulse rifle. "What's the plan here? How do we even start fighting something like this?" Elias didn't have an answer. The Drallik were relentless, and their collective mind made them nearly unbeatable. But Elias had always believed that humanity's greatest strength was its invention, its ability to adapt under pressure. They might be outmatched, but they would never surrender. "We survive," Elias said, the words slipping from his lips before he could stop them. "We fight with everything we have, and when we find an opening, we take it." Kiara raised an eyebrow. "That's it? Survive?" "We survive," Elias repeated, his voice cold with resolve. "And we make them pay for underestimating us." The next hour was a blur of fire and chaos, of human ingenuity battling against impossible odds. The Drallik had only come to conquer, to annihilate. But in their arrogance, they had forgotten one thing: humanity would never go down without a fight. As the sounds of battle raged on, Elias couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the end, or if this was the moment humanity would show the universe just what it meant to be underestimated. The Drallik might have thought they were easy prey, but they had no idea what kind of fight they had just unleashed. The sound of gunfire and screaming reverberated through the steel corridors of Argonaut Base, drowning out everything else. The Drallik forces had swept through the outer defenses with terrifying efficiency, leaving a swath of destruction in their wake. Now the survivors, what remained of the once proud colony, were holed up in pockets of resistance, desperately trying to hold on to their last vestiges of control. Elias had lost count of the hours. He hadn't slept, hadn't stopped moving. His mind was a whirlwind of orders, strategies, and, underneath it all, a sense of growing panic. He could feel the weight of every decision, every life that hung in the balance, every human that had fallen before the relentless tide of the Drallik. He stood at the head of a small contingent of soldiers and engineers, preparing for what would be their final stand. Kiara was by his side, her jaw clenched, her face pale from exhaustion, but her eyes still burning with the fire of defiance. She knew as well as he did that their chances were dwindling by the minute. "We can't keep running forever," Kiara said, her voice steady but laced with fatigue. "We've lost contact with the other bases. The Drallik are systematically hunting us down." Elias's eyes flicked to the communication console. It was nothing but a static-filled wasteland now. No messages, no signals from the outside world. Just silence. The thought of the Drallik isolating them, cutting them off from any hope of reinforcements, made the cold pit in his stomach grow deeper. "I know," he replied, his voice grim but resolute. "But we can't give up, not yet." There was no clear path forward. Every countermeasure they'd thrown at the Drallik had failed. Their energy shields, designed to protect humanity from high-level weapons, were practically useless against the Drallik's biomechanical weaponry. Even their best fighters, armed with pulse rifles and incendiary grenades, were outclassed by the Drallik's hyper-advanced tactics and seamless coordination. But there was one thing the Drallik hadn't anticipated: human ingenuity. Elias walked through the dimly lit hallways, his boots clanging against the metal floor with every step. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the stench of burning fuel and the acrid scent of ozone. His team had retreated to the deepest levels of the base, to the abandoned labs, places once used for research, now reduced to hiding spots and makeshift armories. Here, humanity's true strength lay, not in superior technology, but in the minds that could still think beyond what was expected. Elias had spent hours combing through old research files, abandoned projects, things they hadn't had time to perfect or deploy. His team had begun work on a new tech, a device intended to aid humanity in long-term survival in hostile environments, but it had remained untested, a prototype buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Now, however, it was their only hope. "Is it ready?" Elias asked as he approached the holographic interface that Maya had been working on. The tension was thick in her voice as she answered, "We've managed to complete the final calibrations. It's experimental at best, but it might give us a fighting chance. It's a disruptor pulse aimed to interfere with the Drallik's neural network. If it works, we could sever their collective mind, at least temporarily." Elias raised an eyebrow. "A neural disruptor? You're telling me that if we fire this thing, we could break their hive mind?" Maya nodded, her expression serious. "Exactly. The Drallik function as one unit, their collective intelligence a single integrated consciousness. If we manage to interrupt that, they'll be disoriented, vulnerable. It's not perfect, nothing is, but it's our best shot." The idea of severing the Drallik's hive mind was dangerous, and it was as risky as it sounded. The Drallik were not just invaders. They were predators, and humans had underestimated them. Could their incredible adaptability truly outsmart the Drallik's collective mind? Could a single pulse of energy change the tide of the battle? Before Elias could voice his concerns, Kiara stepped forward. Her face was marked by exhaustion, but her eyes gleamed with something like determination, something close to hope. "Let's make it count," she said, her voice firm. The team made their way to the central reactor deep within the base, a massive chamber filled with arcane high-tech machinery, exactly where the disruptor would have the most impact. The reactor was the heart of the base's energy grid, and it was positioned directly under the Drallik's planned point of attack. The plan was simple: overload the reactor to release a burst of disruptive energy, just as the Drallik were preparing to launch their final offensive. But there were complications. As the team set up the disruptor, the Drallik swarm arrived, crashing through the upper levels of the base, flooding the hallways like an unstoppable tide. They were relentless, each soldier a mirror of the collective will. No hesitation, no doubt, only pure efficiency. "Get it online now," Elias shouted, as the first wave of Drallik soldiers emerged from the shadows, their elongated limbs raised to strike. The fight was brutal. The pulse rifles the humans carried were almost useless against the Drallik armor, but they fought anyway. They were outmatched in almost every way, but the sheer stubbornness of humanity kept them standing. The team retreated toward the reactor, moving in tight formation, blasting the corridors behind them as the Drallik closed in. The chamber itself was a chaos of sparks and gunfire. The disruptor pulse had been activated, but they needed time, just a few more seconds. "Hold the line," Kiara shouted, emptying her rifle into a Drallik soldier charging toward her. Elias could feel the tension building in his chest as he adjusted the coordinates for the disruptor. If they timed it wrong, If the Drallik intelligence adapted too quickly, everything would be lost. He adjusted the settings, glancing back toward his team. Maya, Kiara, and the others were doing their best to hold off the attackers, but they were out of time. With one last deep breath, Elias pressed the activation sequence. A pulse of energy exploded from the reactor. For a moment, everything went still. There was a sound like the universe itself holding its breath. The Drallik soldiers froze in place, their bodies twitching, their limbs locking in mid-motion. The collective mind of the Drallik was disrupted, scattered into chaos. Elias watched, as their once synchronized movements devolved into confusion and disarray. They had done it. But just as quickly, the Drallik began to adapt. The hive mind struggled to regain control, but it wasn't the same. Elias could see it. Flickers in the Drallik's behavior, a momentary break in their unity. The humans had bought themselves time. But how much? "We've got them on the ropes," Kiara shouted, her voice full of adrenaline. "Now let's finish this." But Elias knew better. The Drallik were dangerous not because of their weapons, but because of their ability to adapt, to survive. Humanity's victory had never been guaranteed, but this moment, this small sliver of hope, had given them a chance. The true test was still to come. The pulse had hit. For a moment, the battlefield fell into a deafening silence, like the world itself had paused to take a breath. It was as if the Drallik, the unstoppable force that had nearly wiped out humanity, had suddenly been paralyzed. Their hive mind, so seamless, so unyielding now, flickered and stuttered like a dying star. Elias stood frozen for a heartbeat, absorbing the sheer magnitude of what they had just done. The Drallik swarm was scattered, each soldier acting on instinct, their coordinated attacks now reduced to disjointed chaos. For the first time in hours, the humans had an edge. But this was not a time for hesitation. They were still outnumbered. Still, the advantage was fleeting. Elias could see the Drallik starting to recover, their mind reassembling itself piece by piece. The hive mind had been temporarily shattered, but it wouldn't be long before it adapted again. They needed more time. "We've got seconds," Kiara said, her voice tense. She looked up at the sky through the shattered ceiling, watching the Drallik warship loom overhead. "If we don't act now, we lose everything." Maya was by his side, staring at the control panel that had once held the disruptor pulse. The flickering readouts showed a critical spike in energy, proof that their gamble had worked. For now, the Drallik were disorganized, but they wouldn't be for long. "Target the command center of the Drallik warship," Elias barked. "We take down their central node, break their connection to the hive mind completely. It's our only shot." Kiara nodded, her eyes blazing. "We can hit it with a direct fire from the reactor's core. If we overload the auxiliary conduit, the energy will focus right at their flagship." It was a long shot. The Drallik ship was heavily armored, and a hit to their command center would require pinpoint precision. But it was humanity's only hope. If they could break the Drallik's connection at the top level, the hive mind would collapse entirely. The individual soldiers, scattered as they were, would be nothing more than lifeless shells. The clock was ticking. The team rushed toward the reactor chamber. Gunfire echoed down the corridor as they advanced, still under attack from the remaining Drallik soldiers. The disruptor pulse had done its job, but it hadn't neutralized the enemy entirely. There was still fire in the Drallik, anger, the primal instinct to survive and destroy. The hallway was filled with the flashes of gunfire and the crackling of energy shields. Elias could feel the heat of it on his face, the adrenaline flooding his system as he ran, his fingers gripping the pulse rifle like it was an extension of his arm. They reached the reactor's control panel. Maya was the first to drop to the floor, her fingers dancing over the terminal, reprogramming it to reroute the reactor's energy to the auxiliary conduit that ran directly toward the Drallik ship. The terminal sparked and hummed, the interface buzzing with frantic energy as the last pieces of their plan fell into place. "This better work," Kiara muttered under her breath, scanning their rear for any Drallik soldiers still closing in. Elias glanced at her. "It will work, we have no other choice." The final push came in the form of the Drallik leader, a massive figure towering above the others, his skin rippling like liquid metal. The Overmind, the one who commanded the collective intelligence of the Drallik. It had emerged from the shadows, its black eyes scanning the humans with cold precision. The Overmind was not a mindless drone like the others. It was the culmination of Drallik technology, both artificial and organic. Its voice, when it spoke, was an eerie harmony, of many voices intertwined. "You think you can defeat us humans?" The words dripped with contempt. "You are nothing, fleeting, fragile. The hive mind is eternal." It moved toward them, its form shifting, morphing as though it were a single liquid organism rather than a sentient being. The pulse rifles crackled in Elias's hands as he aimed and fired, but the shots barely slowed the Overmind's advance. Its armor was impenetrable, its form a blend of liquid metal and shifting biomatter, reflecting the chaotic nature of the Drallik mind itself. Elias realized in that moment that their weapons were useless. The Overmind was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a system, a central nexus of Drallik intelligence, far beyond anything human technology had yet conceived. But there was something in Elias's mind that clicked, an idea that flickered into existence, a way to turn this moment to their advantage. "We can't fight it directly," Elias said, his voice steady as he looked toward Kiara and Maya, "but we can outsmart it. If we use its own hive mind against it, we can trap it. We've already disrupted the mind, now we can isolate it." Kiara and Maya exchanged a glance, both knowing exactly what Elias meant. It was a desperate plan, but at this point they were already past the point of no return. "We need to overload the neural link between the Overmind and the rest of the hive," Maya said, her voice sharp as she tapped into the console's emergency override. "We force it to reconnect to the hive, but only partially, cut off from the central collective." Elias nodded, quickly following her lead. They had moments, seconds, to implement the plan. The Overmind was closing in, its molten limbs reaching for them. "Do it," Elias shouted, his voice raw with urgency. Maya input the final command, sending a surge of energy through the system. The Overmind's body convulsed as the overload began. It roared, a sound like the death rattle of a dying star, as its connection to the hive mind was severed. In that moment, the Overmind became something else. It wasn't part of the collective anymore. It was a single consciousness, isolated and alone, disconnected from the hive. Its coordination with the other Drallik soldiers shattered. The Overmind, now a mind without a collective, lost its purpose. The Drallik, left in disarray, began to turn on one another. Elias watched as the Overmind collapsed, its form folding inward, melting like wax in the heat of a fire. It was the end of their greatest adversary, the heart of the Drallik's collective intelligence. But there was no victory in the moment, only a deep, lingering question about the true cost of their survival. "The war isn't over," Kiara said, looking grimly at the chaos unfolding around them. "But this is a start. We've crippled them." Elias nodded, feeling a heavy weight settle in his chest. Humanity had won this battle, but the war was far from over. They had no idea how long the Drallik would take to regroup, or what other enemies lay in wait across the stars. But for now they had survived, and for humanity that was enough.